As I've been trying to study for the Azure Data Fundamentals certification or the DP 900 certification, I've been going through some of the different database types and data that you can store in databases. And I thought it'd be fun to put together a little C#.NET exercise web application showing the different types of structured, semi-structured, and unstructured data and giving examples of each one. So it's both a practice in programming exercises and also helping to solidify some of that information for the certification. So, if you are interested in this kind of certification, you can see it right here. Here is the basic information for it. And they have some tutorial topics you can go through on the site to prepare for the exam and to also practice for it. But showing you some of the application I put together, here's an example of structured data. So you can see here how this application I put together, by the way, is C#.NET. It's a Blazor app. So that was kind of fun to also work with, but you can also do ASP.NET or MVC, or you can do an Angular or React front end, whatever you feel is more enjoyable. But this is Blazor, and I have an example here of structured data. So structured data is your typical relational database that many of us are probably very familiar with from a transactional perspective. This is used for online shopping, games, business warehousing, anything like that that deals with transactional data with relational data that relates to each other. So here I have a table in the database called images, and I'll show this to you in just a second. This images table, it has 4 columns, so ID, file name, file path, and file size. The primary key in this database is ID, but it could just as well be also file name, perhaps, but you could have, I suppose, duplicate file names that are actually different types or different paths, in which case ID will be the primary key. Um, so with the columns and rows, you can form relationships. So maybe you have another table that would be storage location that would map to the ID, but we just have it a little bit. It's actually, I wouldn't even call it normalized. It's already normalized. There's no other relationships, but you could also have file path in a different table. So just to show you what this database looks like, here it is in VS Code. So I've opened database.sqlite. You could have this in a SQL Server database or Oracle or MySQL or Postgres. I'm just using something simple for this demonstration, which is just using SQLite. And you can see, likewise, we have the ID column, the file name, the file path, and the file size. Now, typically, if you're dealing with cloud infrastructure like Azure or AWS, you would store these images on an S3 bucket or in Azure Files in blob storage. And the file path would just be a URI pointing to the resource in Azure Files, blob storage, or an S3 bucket. But we're just pointing to them local. I have them right here inside the www root folder under images. You can see them all here. And that's where they're going to be loading from. So, by the way, I generated this database from a JSON file, which we'll get to in just a second. This is actually semi-structured data, which we'll talk about in just a moment, but this is using the convert JSON to SQLite VS Code extension, which, by the way, if you are interested in getting yourself, let's see here. JSON to SQLite, you can see right here where you can take any JSON file and convert it instantly into an SQLite database. So that's pretty cool. Okay, back to the program. So we have our structured data, and you can see here under pages, if we look at what the code looks like for this. So all we're doing is we're loading the table names, and we're loading the columns and rows from the database. We do have paging, but we don't have to worry about that. Speaking of which, if you want to see what that looks like when we actually run it, This is the table. You can see how you can page through all of the different images in this structured database. And so that's basically structured data. So where does this come from? Well, if you look at the data service that we built right here, you can see that we have a connection string pointing to the SQLite database. And then all we're doing is a select star. This is called DQL, or data query language, where we're just doing a select statement to retrieve all of the columns from images. Likewise, we're doing a select statement here to get all the table names, which is just one. It's called images. And that's how we get the result. Okay, so taking a look back at, there's our images table and there's all the data. The next one after structured data is semi-structured data. So semi-structured data is typically either column family database data or NoSQL. And you can see here how we have a JSON file. A JSON file is a perfect example of semi-structured data. It's data that doesn't have a fixed format like a relational table where every column has the same format, the same type, and rows, every row has the same columns. Here you have differing structures. So here I have one giant JSON file, which is all of those images that we just saw. You would store this in a Mongo database. You could store this in Cosmos DB. You could store this in various other NoSQL databases, even Postgres. And you could have different types of JSON blobs inside the database column. So you could have a column which would be your blob data, um, and you would store the JSON document, different JSON documents, and you could have a primary key. So that's why this is called semi-structured, and it's kind of like a key value pair even. So the key could be the ID and the value could be the JSON object, and you can render this. So if we take a look at the code for this, looking back at semi-structured database, you can see all we're doing is we're just populating the JSON data. And where are we getting that from? We are just simply, this is actually generating the JSON file. But what we're really doing is we're just loading the JSON data property with the contents from the JSON file, which is constructed by parsing all of the images. We could just read the JSON file and output it, and that's fine too, but that's simply going right here. By the way, if you like the format, the style, if you take a look at the style for this again, this JSON is color coded and formatted, and that is actually coming from a plugin that you can see right here in it's called Code Mirror, and I just initialize the element ID, which is text JSON, after we populate that data. And you can see that occurring right here with this call to GS runtime. We're executing initialize code mirror, which and then again it executes this function right here, which styles the JSON. Okay, so that's semi-structured data. Um, The third type is unstructured data. This is perhaps one of the more fun ones. So, with unstructured data, we're dealing with blobs. Blobs are binary files. They could be audio, they could be memos, notes, raw text, statements, PDF documents, or images are commonly binary blob files. So, this is all unstructured data. There's no clear relation to them. You can store different types. Now, where would you store unstructured data? You would store unstructured data in blob storage on Azure Files or AWS S3 in a bucket. So let's pretend that these are loading from Azure Files. The way that you would load these in a web page typically is you would have a structured or semi-structured database, which would be your external lookup table. It could just be a key value store, like Azure Table Storage would be perfectly fitting for this, where you would store the file name and the file path, and the file path would be a URI pointing to AWS S3 or Azure Files. And so that's how we can render unstructured data. So you can see here how I have a key value table or an external lookup table that contains two columns, the key and the value. The key is simply the file name, and the value is the file path or a URI to an AWS S3 bucket or an Azure Files blob storage URL. And we render those in the page. So how does this look in the code? Well, if we take a look at the code for the unstructured data, you can see here how I'm just rendering a static example of the key value store, which is the external lookup table. And then we're just looping through all of the images from that table and rendering from the key value store and rendering the key and the image, which is the value in that key value pair. If you look at the code for this, we do have two DTO objects or data transfer objects. We have the database JSON and we have the image data itself with each column that we're mapping from the JSON. So you can see here's our key value store. Think of this as an Azure table storage. I'm just simulating this using an in-memory data structure. And when our Blazor page initializes, we read the JSON data, which would be your external database, and we read the images from the JSON data, populate that into our table, our lookup table, or our key value pair storage, and then we can render the data from images. And that's how the images file populates and then renders all of the images right here. And so that is how we get our view of unstructured data. And this pretty much completes the demo. So we have both structured data, which is relational data with primary keys and foreign keys, and it's queryable using DQL or data manipulation language. And this is how you can use structured data, followed by semi-structured data, which doesn't have a clear defined schema. And an example of this is JSON documents, which can be stored in NoSQL storage, such as MongoDB, or even Cassandra or Postgres, various other NoSQL databases, and followed by unstructured data, which does not belong in a relational data or even NoSQL database, but rather in Azure Files storage, blob storage, or AWS S3 buckets. And you can have an external lookup table, like a key value store, using Azure Table Storage, where you can map the file name and the file path to a remote URI on Azure Files or S3. So I hope that this demo gave you a little bit of fun and learning about the three different types of data that you can use with cloud storage, from structured data, semi-structured data, and unstructured data. And I hope that this helps you a little bit with studying for the Azure Data Professional Fundamental Certification for the DP 900. And if you like this, please like and subscribe. And thank you for watching.